So let's go ahead and get started with our class. I'm so thankful that you all are joining me this morning to prep a little bit of ceviche. And I will say that ceviche is one of the things that was really, really tough for me to I don't like to use the word give up, because I just feel like I just shifted the way that I ate ceviche versus giving up something. And it's interesting because I actually, my mom is from Zacatecas and my dad is from Ecuador, from Quito. And when they migrated here to Los Angeles, it was the first time that my mom had ever been near an ocean. And so she didn't really grow up eating very much seafood. But over time and living in Los Angeles, it became a tradition of my family, of my immediate family, to drive to the port of San Pedro here in Los Angeles every few weeks or so, especially during the summer months. And we would eat tons of seafood, come back super stuffed, and it would just be a day of us, picking out which crab we wanted, breaking it down ourselves, walking around the port, and then coming back home. So that's a tradition that became a part of my family and our lifestyle. And so when I decided to go plant-based, I knew that I wanted to be able to create those similar nostalgic flavors of a ceviche, of cocktail, and all those things that I had grown up eating. And I had eaten heart of palm prior to going plant-based. And when I ate it on a salad at a friend's house way, way back, the type of heart of palm, because there's different varieties that you can find, which I'll talk a little bit about. It was so soft, and the texture really reminded me of this crab-like texture. And the flavor also reminded me of a seafood flavor. And so I thought, oh, that would be cool as a ceviche, even back before I officially made the transition over to being fully plant-based. And so this is an ingredient that I really love to use for, it could be for salads, it could be for the ceviche. Some people even use it for crab cakes and things like that. Mixture of heart of palm and jackfruit would make a really nice crab cake. And so you can use it for a variety of different things. And we'll get right into the recipe. And I have all of my ingredients here that I'll break down during our class. And but before we get into the ceviche portion, I wanted to make our michelada just in case anybody is cooking along and you want to have a little something to sip on as you are preparing your ceviche. So I'm gonna grab some tomato juice that I have in the fridge. So I have this big mason jar with 3 cups of tomato juice. Mason jars are great because they already have the measurement on the glass itself, so you can see how much is in there. And let me bring this to the center of my cutting board so you can see it with the other camera here. So I have 3 cups of tomato juice. You can get low sodium. You can get whatever variety of tomato juice you typically like to get. I like to get it as plain as possible because we're going to add the flavor to it. And this michelada mix is really, really, really simple. If you want to have like a nice, brunch moment over the weekend or something like that, micheladas never fail. It's such a drink that goes hand in hand with having ceviche, because it has that nice balance of acidity, but the tomato also does help ground it slightly. And so it just goes so perfectly. And this will serve about 4 people or so. And let me go ahead and open up to the recipe in my book, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is La Vida Verde. If you haven't picked it up yet, make sure you do. And I'm looking at page 144 for the michelada recipe. And I love micheladas. I've always loved micheladas, which are very different than a Bloody Mary. Some people are like, oh, it's the same thing. And it's like, oh, no. A Bloody Mary typically consists of like horseradish and olives, and more of like a briny, vinegar-based drink. And the spiciness comes from the horseradish, which is very different than like a chile, right? It's a root plant that has like a fiery note to it. And it's typically drank with vodka for the Bloody Mary. Whereas here with the michelada, it's made with beer as a center point. Or if you don't drink, you could always use sparkling water or something like an agua mineral or a topo chico to just give you that fizzy element. And rumor has it, I guess it's more than a rumor, but legend has it, that the way micheladas were invented in Mexico or started in Mexico is because there was a general, his name was Michel, in Mexico, in San Juan Potosí, and he would go into his favorite bar there in San Juan Potosí, and he would order his chelada, which is kind of slang for a beer, his chela, and he would order his chela with a side of limon, sal, chile, and a few other things, and he would add all these things to his beer to make it kind of spicy and acidic and salty, and they would call it his Michel. His name was Michel, so Michelada was essentially how that was born. But there's other rumors, like you'll probably go to like, 30 different places across Mexico that say, oh, we invented the Michelada. So many people have so many different stories of how it started, but that's the one in my research that I found to be pretty consistent in the storytelling. And so this Michelada obviously also includes salsa de tomate or tomato juice, right, or jugo de tomate. And if that's not your thing, you could keep it really simple with just lemon juice, salt, some chilito or something to kind of spice up your beer. And one really important element is lemon juice or lime juice, if that's your thing. I prefer to use lemon, and you'll see throughout the book that a lot of the recipes that require that acidity will be a lemon juice. And that's mostly because I live here in Los Angeles in California, and lemons are native to this area where limes are not. Limes are typically imported from Mexico. And so I just wanted to keep it as local as possible, especially since I do a lot of shopping at farmers markets, and you can't or you don't typically find limes at farmers markets, but you'll find tons of lemons. So I have here half a cup of lemon juice. If you were using limes, you would want to maybe use a little bit less to start off, maybe like a third of a cup or even a quarter cup, and just taste the acidity and see if you need any more, because limes tend to be a little bit more acidic. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour this half a cup. I'm trying to keep the seeds out of here. There we go. So I have a half a cup of my lemon juice that went in. And then I'm going to add some chile powder, but I'm kind of cheating because I'm using Tajín. Shout out to Tajín. This is like not a partnership or anything like that, but they've created something that just tastes really delicious. A lot of people love it. You could also use, like, I have like a mild Chile California that you could use, or something like that, that'll give enough of a flavor of that chile in the back note, but you don't want it to be overly spicy either. So I wouldn't recommend a cayenne pepper unless you're using just a tiny pinch of it. So I'm gonna add here 2 tablespoons of this to the michelada mix. And I'll go ahead and just drop that in. I'm starting with my dry ingredient here before I start adding moisture to this measuring spoon. And then I'm gonna add a couple more things that are wet. So I have a couple of sauces here. So what typically doesn't allow a michelada mix, like a prepackaged mix, to be vegan is sometimes clamato is used, and clamato, that brand, has a little bit of clam juice in it, hence the name clamato. And then the other thing is Worcestershire sauce, which I always say all kind of weird, but Worcestershire sauce typically has anchovies in it, which makes it not vegan as well. But there are several brands out there now, including this one here by Robbie's, that is vegan. And so there are plenty of options out there. It still has this very tangy, pungent, almost sweet and aromatic flavor to it. And it's made up of tons of different ingredients. Like, if you've ever wondered what's in here, but it's everything from like molasses to apple cider vinegar to tapioca starch to garlic, salt, onion powder. It has sugar, it has yeast in it, and some spices. And so this is going to add a nice element to the back note of the michelada mix. And I'm going to add here, and I'm just checking my recipe, my own recipe, because I tend to eyeball things. And this book forced me to really measure things, but I still have to look at it to make sure that I'm adding everything properly. So I'm going to add a tablespoon of this Worcestershire sauce. And so I'll just pour that out and add it to the michelada mix. And the other thing that I'm going to add, which will add a little bit more of that spicy note to it, is a hot sauce. And I'm adding here tapatio. You could add Cholula, you could add Valentina, you could add your favorite hot sauce, whatever it may be. It might be a habanero one and give it even more of a kick, but just add less of it. Like I have this really nice habanero one. Let's see if I have it right here up top. I think it's at the bottom. The chile habanero, it's el yucateco. And this would be also another nice point in here. But this is one thing that is really good on ceviche as well too, that you can just add to give a little bit of this like smoky flavor that's also that nice punch of heat that you get from the habanero. But this is a really good hot sauce. But obviously if you use something like that, you would use a whole lot less of it. And I'm gonna put that aside here. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple tablespoons of this tapatio hot sauce or any other hot sauce that you'd like. I gotta say, I'm still a sucker for tapatio because I grew up eating so much of it on everything from like terrible things, top ramen, tuna salads, like canned tuna salads that I'd make. It's one thing that's kind of a little bit nostalgic for me. And like I said, we grew up eating a lot of seafood, and tapatio was always, my mom would have it in her purse for all of us. So one thing that I haven't really let go of. And of course, we're gonna wanna add some salt. So the salt really depends on what kind of salt you're using. But here I have just a flaky kosher salt. And keep in mind that when you taste this michelada mix, it hasn't been mixed with the beer just yet. So right now it's gonna be really salty, acidic. It's gonna have some heat. If you drank it alone, which I probably would, it's gonna feel like the flavors are really intensified, but that's because it's gonna get diluted down a little bit with your beer. So feel free to salt liberally. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple pinches here. And just making sure I didn't leave anything out. You could put a couple of cracks of fresh pepper in here if you'd like, but salt is perfectly good as just your seasoning to add here. And I'm just going to mix this all up, making sure it's all well incorporated. And I'm gonna give it a taste. That packs a punch, definitely. It's so good. And so it definitely has the heat that hits the back of your throat, has a nice amount of acid to it. It's just all around really delicious. The Worcestershire gives it another depth of flavor that makes you wonder like what else is in there. Back in the day, I also used to use Maggi, which is also vegan, but it has MSG in it, but it does for micheladas give a interesting flavor. So that's another thing that if you had that on hand, you could just put a couple splashes in there, but really up to you. And so I'm gonna go ahead and grab a glass. I'm gonna make a little baby one. And the other thing I'm gonna do is let me get these out of the way for a moment. I'm gonna add a little bit of chili powder. You could add salt, or whatever it is that you want to rim your glass with. And just add a little bit to a bowl, just enough so that you can, I'm just gonna rim one glass, but if you were doing all 4 portions, you would add a little bit more in there. And then I'm going to just use a lemon here to just moisten the rim of a glass. You could use a little bit of water if you wanted to. And then all I'm gonna do is I'm going to just put my glass upside down and rim the glass with a little bit of the chili powder, the salt, whatever it is that you wanted to use. One time I tried doing it with this homemade chili powder that I made that had a little bit of sugar in it. It was like a mix of like equal parts like sugar, salt, chili powder, a couple different chili powders. And that chili powder was really good for a lot of things, but it was not good with the michelada because the sweetness was just off. And so it just for me tasted a little bit strange. But if you have a sweet tooth and you like that flavor combination, you can definitely add it. And then all you have to do, I would chill this a little bit more to make sure that you have a really chilled michelada mix. You don't typically add ice to a michelada, so you want to just make sure everything's super chilled. And you're just going to pour in about a third of the way up. I did more. Like I said, I actually prefer the michelada mix more than beer. I don't really drink very much, and I don't typically drink beer unless it's in a michelada. And so you want to do a third of the glass or a little bit more. And then let me grab my beer. And I'm using here Victoria beer, which is a Mexican lager. You can choose any beer that you have on hand. I like to, I used to use Modelos a lot, but they're one of the Constellation brands that have been having some issues with water consumption in Mexico. And so I switched over to Victoria, which obviously I've had before and is really delicious. And this is straight out of the fridge, so it's nice and cold. And when you pour, you want to kind of angle your glass a little bit to not get too much foam there. And you can give it a mix if you want, but the pouring should have created a little bit of mixing. And you have your nice little michelada to start sipping on before we get into our ceviche. So this is your little fun pre-game before you get into the action of the actual meal. And that is really good. Like I said, that michelada mix, it really balances well with the beer. And I highly recommend here that you use a Mexican beer, because I've also had a michelada at a place before, like at a restaurant or a bar. I can't remember exactly where they paired a beer that wasn't Mexican and they made it into michelada, and there was just something flavor profile that just wasn't exactly right. And so I highly recommend Mexican beer, michelada mix. It's going to be the perfect pair together. Cheers if you're drinking too. Okay, so let's get into our ceviche now. And this is going to be a lot of chopping, a lot of knife skills. And if you are prepping along, please feel free to ask any questions along the way. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident about your ceviche. All right, and I'm going to grab a bowl to put all of my ceviche into so it's easy for mixing. So I have a bowl here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this heart of palm. So I have this heart of palm that I purchased canned. You can purchase this jarred. Sometimes you can find it already chopped or sliced, different textures. I find that when I have purchased sliced heart of palm, it tends to be kind of crunchy. It doesn't have the same soft texture that I have found in a whole piece of heart of palm. And I really look for the ones that have a little bit of give, where they don't feel crunchy and stiff. They have this really soft, almost borderline mushy texture. But I also have found some that are mushy, and it's not that great for this recipe, because as you try to slice or create some sort of texture to your heart of palm as you're cooking or cutting, it sometimes will just mush up on you and not really have that desired look that you want in a ceviche. Does anybody have a question out there? I think I hear some audio. Let's see here. Just double checking.
Jocelyn?
Yes?
What is that in the bowl again? I couldn't find it in the recipe.
Sure. This is heart of palm. This
Heart
is
of palm.
the main ingredient of the recipe. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So then let me go ahead and there we go. All right. So heart of palm, you can typically find at your local health food store. They sell it everywhere now, from Whole Foods. I know Trader Joe's has sold the whole heart of palm in a jar, and then also sliced heart of palm in a pouch, in a plastic pouch. And I've tried them all. but I find that the ones that have worked best for me are in a can. And that's just a personal preference. You might find something different. I've also seen one in a bigger jar where it's like all minced stuff already. And I haven't tried that one, but just looking at it, I can tell that it's kind of crunchy heart of palm and not this like softer texture. And when I say it has a softer texture, I mean like it has a little bit of like a give to it. So if I were to bite into this, it wouldn't crunch, it would kind of smush a little bit. And that's what I'm looking for. And so you're gonna use one 14-ounce can, or if you find one that's a little bit bigger, that's fine too. And what you wanna do is you wanna slice up your heart of palm in whatever desired texture you prefer. So for me, go ahead.
We have two questions here. Can you get the heart of palm fresh? And if it's in water, do you need to wring it out in excess?
Great question. So you typically cannot find heart of palm fresh. It's something that's typically grown in South America, and it's literally what it sounds like. It's the heart of a palm. So it's this palm tree where the exterior of the tree trunk is stripped away, and then you get left with this interior heart of the palm. And like I said, it's typically grown in South America and then transported here to the United States. And when it is in a can or a jar, it's typically in some sort of a liquid that's keeping it fresh, or keeping it in that current preserved state. And you're going to want to drain that out. And I found that I don't necessarily have to rinse it as long as I drain out that liquid, similar to like artichoke hearts or something like that. I don't always rinse those because that water that it's in, which usually is like salt and water, sometimes citric acid to preserve it, it also has some of that flavor of the heart of palm and the artichoke hearts. So I typically just strain them out of the liquid and then transfer them directly to a bowl to start preparing them for whatever it is that I'm working on. So I'm going to cut a couple at a time, and I'm going to use my chef's knife here. And I like to, you'll notice that one side of the heart of palm is a little bit wider than the other. And so I like to pair up to where they're opposites. Like this one has a wide side on this side, this one has a wide side on the other side. Sometimes they're perfectly, the cylinder is like the same size throughout the top to bottom. Sometimes they have this sort of like, I don't know what you call it, like this shape where it's bigger at the bottom, more narrow at the top. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to bare claw my hand, and I'm going to use my knife to create some slices. And the slices could be as thin or as thick as you'd like. And you can see here that the texture, it sort of has a little give. This one broke in half. This one has a little bit of a crunch, but not the type of crunch that I was talking about. There's literally somewhere I've had it and it's like eating an apple, like that crunchy. And that's not the type of crunch that I want. This type of crunch is the consistency of a peach that has not fully ripened yet. Like a peach that's still a little bit crunchy but soft. That's the first thing that came to mind. All right, so I'm just gonna create my slices. And as you slice, you might notice that there are these rings that are in the heart of palm, and the rings start to slowly fall apart. And I'm cool with that. I like that, you know, these rings almost remind me kind of like a calamari or something like that. And so it's fine if they come apart from each other. That's totally good. And they will eventually once you start kind of mixing things around. And I like to try to keep them as, I guess like I'd like to be gentle as much as possible, because the heart of palm, although it has, like I said, if it has a little bit of that crunchiness or that texture that feels a little bit more stiff, it's going to be on the outer ring. And the more that you go into the inner ring, the more fragile it will become. So I'm just being really gentle here. One other thing that sometimes will happen is as you're applying a little bit of pressure with your knife, especially if you don't have a sharp knife, sometimes the inner rings will push out as you're cutting. So like as you're cutting, the inner ring will like push out the back of where you're cutting. And I'm doing rings just because this is my personal preference. But if you wanted to chop this up, if you wanted to make strips, like long strips, by all means, you're welcome to do any of that. You know, so you can really make this your own. And one thing I also did want to mention, I'm going to do 3 at a time now, is that this recipe can easily be made with like if you can't find the heart of palm in your local health food store, you could try to purchase it online. Like you could go to some of the options that are either in the back of the book on the online resources in the back of the book, or if you don't have the book handy, we also have those online resources in the on the website that you use to register for this class. So you could go to our todoverde.org/online classes website, and you'll see some online places where you can purchase heart of palm and get it delivered directly to you. But say that wasn't an option, they don't deliver to you, or they have it out of stock. You could easily replace this heart of palm with cauliflower that you mince up, you know, and get it broken down into smaller pieces. And if you are using something like a cauliflower, I highly recommend that you let the cauliflower sit in your marinade. So here I have a crunchy bit. I'm gonna interrupt myself. I could already tell because I'm trying to slice through this, and it's hard. And so I'm just gonna eat that. And it's crunchy. And I just don't really like that texture in the ceviche. It feels a little fibrous. It's definitely not that seafood texture that I like. So that's Jocelyn's snack. So if you were using cauliflower, I've done it a few different ways. I've done a cauliflower ceviche where I, one heart of palm overboard. I've done it where I've blanched the cauliflower to soften it, and I use like tons of kelp and like seaweed and all these things to give it like the seafood flavor. And I blanched it just to give it this like softer texture. And then I seasoned it with like a aguachile flavor. And I just found that the blanching for me, it just watered down the flavor. Like, so I wouldn't prefer like steaming or blanching or anything like that. I think you should go directly from the raw minced cauliflower, add your acid, add your oil, and let that marinate overnight. And letting it marinate overnight will soften, it'll do what ceviche is, right? The acidity is cooking whatever the item is that's sitting in that marinade, and then you'll get that soft texture that you're looking for. So I am going to transfer my heart of palm into my bowl.
Jocelyn, can you use artichoke heart in this recipe?
Yeah, I haven't personally made it with artichoke heart, but there have been several people who have emailed us asking if they could, or that's all they had on hand, and they did it, and they said it was good. They said that they definitely, there was one person who had heart of palm and artichoke hearts, and she was cooking for her family, which was a bigger family. And so she made one batch of the heart of palm ceviche and another batch with artichoke hearts. And she said that both were really good, but the heart of palm was better. And so you can definitely try it. It's still going to be good, but it'll be even better with the heart of palm. And the other thing that you could use that is carried at most Mexican food stores and also some Asian stores are dehydrated soy curds. So, you know, I've had ceviche before where you have the dried pieces of soy. And again, you're using the same idea of like rehydrating the soy in the acid of lemon juice. I would add a little bit of something sweeter, like orange or something like that, just to balance out so that your soy isn't so acidic. And then you can add something like an oil to give it a little bit of that fat texture. And then add, once it's rehydrated, which could take a couple hours, you can leave it in the fridge overnight, then you can add all your other elements. So here I have all my heart of palm that has been broken down. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add my acid and my oil. And so I'll start off with my, let me open up to this recipe. I'm now moving, if you're in the book, I'm moving over to page 21, which I should have done when I started this recipe. And I'm gonna squeeze out half a cup of lemon juice, which I'll do right now. and I have a 1/4 cup of olive oil. And I like to use olive oil for this recipe just because it gives me a little bit of that fat that I usually have tasted in a ceviche. So when you're eating a ceviche with any type of seafood, with the fish or even shrimp or whatever it may be, that seafood typically has some fat in it. And this heart of palm does not have any fat in it. And so it needs a little something. I've found that when I've made it just with lemon juice and no fat, it just feels a little bit flat. I don't know if you've ever read this book called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. It's a book about balancing flavors. And that's exactly what ceviche is. It's salt, fat, acid, heat, and all of those things in one dish just marry and sing really well. And it makes so much of a better dish. So definitely add the fat in there unless for whatever reason you cannot do that for dietary reasons. I'm going to bring back my measuring cup and I'm just going to squeeze out some lemons here until I get to about 1/2 cup. And I have a secret here too. This is a little bit of a shortcut just in case you don't have enough lemons, because I have found recently that I can't buy enough lemons. Like I'm going through lemons so quickly. And one little trick that I do sometimes is I'll add in a little bit of apple cider vinegar if I don't really meet my desired amount of lemon juice for a recipe, or if I know, oh, I can't use all the lemons right now because I have something later that absolutely needs lemons. Then I'll put a splash of apple cider vinegar, or mix a little bit of apple cider vinegar with a little bit of water and add that, and that'll be that acid. And when it's mixed in with the lemon juice, you can't taste the fact that there's vinegar in there. You just feel the acid, especially when you have all these other ingredients in there, like the avocado and the tomato and the cilantro and all of that good stuff. So right now I'm at about a 1/4 cup, and I have here my lemon squeezer, which is seriously so helpful in getting as much of this juice out as possible. And I'm almost to my 1/2 cup. I'm almost at a 1/3 of a cup here. I like to go on both sides and make sure I'm getting all the juice that's captured on top of that piece of lemon. Any questions as I'm squeezing here? All right, almost done. And if you did, oh, go ahead.
Just, you mentioned some places that you can buy heart of palm at, but are there any brands in particular that you recommend?
The one that I usually buy, the name is blanking right now. It's Forest, something Forest. I can't think of the name right now. Native Forest. Is that the one?
I think that might be it.
That one is really good. The one that we get with Todo Verde it's a wholesale, like a chef's brand. I don't think they sell it at regular markets because the cans are much bigger. They're not like a small retail amount. Wow, I cut the perfect amount of lemons. All right, I am just at my 1/2 cup. Go ahead.
And also, Lourdes wants to know, can you use white asparagus?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think white asparagus could be really interesting. But again, I would let that marinate a little bit because asparagus, if it's not cooked, is slightly crunchy. And so you need to allow that to break down slightly. So I would let that marinate over a longer period of time until you get that desired texture that feels like it's slightly cooked. Let me toss these lemon peels. You can't always throw everything in the compost. All right, and give my hands a quick rinse. All right, so I have my 1/2 cup of lemon juice here, fresh squeezed lemon juice, and I'm gonna go ahead and add that to the bowl here, making sure I'm like keeping back any seeds. There we go. All right, so we have our 1/2 cup there. Remove this away, and then I'm gonna salt and pepper this to the desired amount of seasoning that you'd like. And if you give this a taste, you should note that it should be slightly salty, really acidic. Same concept as I talked about with the michelada, in that once you add your tomato, your pepino, your avocado, your cilantro, your jalapeño, everything else, the saltiness is gonna go down significantly because all of those things are gonna need salt. So I like to salt it pretty well now and allow this to marinate. And you can pop it in your fridge, probably the best option. I'm not gonna do that now just because I'm gonna keep adding to the top of this as we chop along, which is sort of my shortcut. But if you had more time to just let this sit in the fridge for 30 minutes as you chop everything else and then bring it out and mix everything together, the heart of palm will absorb some of that oil, some of the saltiness, and it's just gonna be so much better of a dish. I'm gonna add a little bit more salt. I want this to feel like you wouldn't eat this on its own. It should feel salty, but not salty to the point where it's like, you know, it's a mistake. Just salty to the point where it's like, okay, this needs something to kind of bring it down a notch. Let me give it another taste. All right, good. So I'm gonna set this aside. Just imagine that I'm putting it in my fridge for 30 minutes. And let's keep chopping here. So I'm gonna move on to my tomato. And I have here a bowl of tomatoes. It calls for 1 globe tomato, also known as a beefsteak tomato. These are actually tomatoes that I grew myself, tomatoes and tomatillos from my garden. And I'm going to add whichever one looks more ripe, which is this one right now. And it's a little bit on the smaller side than I like. I like a good amount of tomato in my ceviche, so I'll add another little one. All right, so I have my tomatoes here, and all I'm gonna do is, you could remove the part where the stem was holding on to the tomato. And all you wanna do is you wanna create some slices about 1/4 inch of thickness. And then you can pile on some pieces and create then about 1/4 inch thick slices. Turn that, and then you're gonna do about 1/4 inch dice. So again, notice that I'm bear clawing my fingers. So as I'm dicing this up, I'm holding on to the tomato with my fingertips, but I'm cutting against my knuckles. And so what that does is that just protects my fingertips from the blade so that I don't cut myself. And I like to cut a few layers at a time, just so we can go a bit faster. And here's that little piece that holds onto the stem, which we could remove. I don't really mind it, to be honest with you. Some people are like, whoa, you left that piece of tomato in there. It's like, okay, tastes the same. But up to you. At the kitchen, we use a tool that just takes all of that. It's a little scooper to take that out really easily. And again, I'm gonna flip my tomato. If you had a tomato that was like really round and was like wobbling all over your cutting board, you could easily cut the top, cut the top off of your tomato. And then you have a very solid piece of tomato that's not gonna roll around your cutting board. And you're gonna then make your slices. Notice that I'm using a very sharp knife here, so it's not struggling to cut through that skin of the tomato. If you have a dull knife, you're gonna struggle a little bit because your knife might slide around the skin of the tomato. All right, so I'm gonna just keep dicing along here. I'd love to answer any questions you might have. And one thing I will say about the tomato is use a nice red ripe tomato. If you have access to a store or to a garden that has heirloom tomatoes, like beautiful red heirloom tomatoes, or you go to the farmer's market, I'm telling you that this ceviche is gonna be so much better with that tomato, because I mean, you can use any variety, but sometimes I've seen, you know, people who are using tomatoes that are just underripe. They're still slightly green, and you're not really getting that true flavor of the tomato when you do that. You know, you're getting something that's almost there, but not quite. It's like eating a green banana, you know? You could eat it, but it's not fun. It doesn't have the same flavor that a ripe banana has, or a banana that's just ripening. All right, and I'm just including in here these last couple pieces. There we go. All right, so tomato is all diced up, a nice 1/4 inch pieces. And then I'm gonna go ahead and bring over my avocado. Actually, before I get into my avocado, it's gonna get messy because I'm gonna keep things on my cutting board. I'm going to bring over, this calls for 1 Persian cucumber. I'm using here a regular cucumber because I couldn't find Persian in my local store. And my cucumber plant just passed away, RIP. I'm trying to bring it back to life, but my garden was too hot the last couple weeks. So I'm using here a regular cucumber that's a little bit on the smaller side. And all you have to do is cut off the top and the bottom of it. And what we do with Todo Verde is we actually use a mandolin. If you've never used a mandolin, I don't have one here at home. It's essentially a contraption that has a really sharp blade, and you just slice. You know, you're just using your hand, the movement of your hand to slice uniform thin slices of cucumber. You could also do that with your knife if you wanted to just cut uniform thin slices of cucumber that are about maybe a little bit less than a 1/4 inch, like 1/8 of an inch in thickness. And I like to, I'm gonna go ahead and slice this. You could dice it if you wanted to. It's really up to you, the textures that you prefer in your ceviche dish. So for Todo Verde, we always slice. In the book, I dice, because most people tend to dice at home, but really up to you, whatever texture you prefer for your cucumber. And if you had an extra large cucumber that you found at the store, and it has a lot of seeds in it, and it's just, sometimes they're really watery in the center, you could slice your cucumber lengthwise down the, down the center. So cut it lengthwise, and then use a small spoon or a spoon to just scoop out some of those seeds. And I would just put those seeds into like the water that I'm drinking, just so that I still get lots of that, everything that the cucumber provides. Cucumber provides a lot of like moisture, and is all around so good for us to eat. But sometimes that extra moisture just waters down the ceviche flavor too much for me if it has a lot of seeds in it. All right, so I'm just about done with my cucumber. And again, if you're dicing, all you would do is cut lengthwise down your cucumber, and then you can, if it's really big, then you can cut it maybe lengthwise like 2 or 3 times, and then create the slices that we did similar to the tomato, and then turn it, and then you would dice. So you have a dice here. So either option works perfectly for this dish. And if you were, scooping the seeds out, and we're gonna add that to the ceviche, you could even like slice half moon shapes, because the scooping out of the seeds are gonna leave this little concave area, and you can just do half moons. Next up, I'm going to add my jalapeno. And so I have a jalapeno here, and I'll move this over slightly. And it calls for half of a jalapeno. Really, it ultimately depends on how spicy this is. So if you have a jalapeno that's extremely spicy, definitely only use half, scoop out the seeds. If you're using a jalapeno that's not spicy and you want to use all of it, definitely feel free, because it's kind of weird sometimes to just have like a loose half of a jalapeno hanging out in your fridge. And so feel free to use the whole thing if it's not too spicy. So I'm going to cut off the top of the jalapeno, and then I'm going to come here to my cutting board, and I'm going to use my knife to cut down lengthwise. So when I use half, I usually cut down lengthwise versus cutting in half. And the reason is because the heat is usually more centralized, where you have the seeds and the, you know, the inside pieces of the jalapeno. And when you get further down towards the tip, you have a little bit less heat where the seeds are not concentrated. And so every time I'm using a jalapeno, every time we cook with Todo Verde, we always take a slice and we taste it. Really important here, because if you have a super spicy jalapeno and you didn't know it, and you added the whole thing or even half of it to your dish, it could ruin it because it could be too spicy. This has a little punch of heat to it, not too spicy. Ooh, it has a little after taste of the heat. I like that heat, and so my light just turned off on me for whatever reason. I like that heat, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave the seeds and everything inside of the jalapeno, and I'm just gonna slice it all up. But if you don't prefer that, you can definitely remove the seeds. So I'll get a little bit more light in here. And all I'm gonna do is I'm going to create slices lengthwise. So I'm just slicing lengthwise down my jalapeno, again, cutting against my knuckles. So now I have these long strips, and then I'm going to just cut those little strips into tiny, tiny little pieces, really small. And if they're not that small, don't worry, because we're still going to mince this up, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. All right, so I have some pieces chopped up here. Let me get into this piece of jalapeno. So again, just cutting against my knuckles. I'm just slicing the jalapeno lengthwise. So I have these nice long strips. And I'm going to, so some people don't like to include the portion of the seeds because they don't like the look of the seeds or the way like the pith or the inside area of the jalapeno looks that's holding together the seeds. I'm okay with that. I mean, if it tastes good, and I don't think it's a big deal. But if you don't like the look of that, you can definitely remove it. And so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring my jalapeno to a pile all together on my cutting board, and I'm just going to use my knife to just mince it even further. So any larger pieces that I see, I wanna just break them down. And this is an ingredient that we actually also slice with Todo Verde when we cater. We super thinly slice this jalapeno with our mandolin to create paper thin little strips of jalapeno. And then that way, when you're eating it, you can definitely tell that it's jalapeno because you're seeing the round piece of jalapeno, but it's so thin that if it is spicy, it's not gonna be too spicy to eat. Let me bring this back into a mound again. Great. All right, there we are with our jalapeno. I think we're pretty good here. And then I'm going to bring over my avocado. And this calls for 1/2 avocado, but because these are a little bit on the smaller side, I'm gonna use 2. Let me bring my light over just slightly. It's gonna help light up this section a little bit more. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna use 2 smaller avocados. And these are nice and ripe. I hope that they're looking good inside. And an avocado, you know it's ripe when you can push down on the top and bottom, and it has a little give to it. And it shouldn't feel like squishy. It should feel like it still has some firmness, but it also has a give. And so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my knife to carefully cut down lengthwise on the avocado, and I have a really nice one here. Awesome. All right, and let me grab my knife again, cut around this avocado, and another really nice one there. Great. And all I'll do is use a spoon here to remove the seed. And then I'm gonna remove it from the skin, and then I'll start slicing it up or dicing it up. And just for extra presentation, you could also slice up some avocado to add over the top of your tostada, or if you're serving it family style, you could just add it over the top. And that slice just gives, if you had a couple slices and you kind of fanned them over the ceviche dish, it just looks so cool. All right, and then make sure you're scooping every little last bit of this avocado. I know it's not going to be like a dice shape, but you can totally just throw that into the bowl with the ceviche. And because it's so soft, it's going to give the ceviche this nice texture of like creaminess that I really like. And that's really important. Like there was a while with Todo Verde where I got obsessed with fanning the avocado over the top because it looks really nice. And we wouldn't include avocado in the ceviche itself. And this was just like maybe a 2 weeks where I was like, no, but it looks so good with the fanning. And my team was like, oh, but I feel like it's missing the creaminess. And yeah, sure enough, after eating it a couple times, I'm like, yeah, they're right. So we would do then half of the avocado would be mixed in. So we dice it up. And then when you mix it in, it really like breaks down the avocado. So they're not like beautiful diced pieces. It should feel like it's kind of like rounding on the edges, almost like when you cook a potato in a soup and it doesn't feel like a perfectly diced potato, it kind of breaks it down. If you had a really large Hass avocado, I recommend when you bring it down to your cutting board to cut across the center, like almost like you're filleting. You can bring your hand to the top of the avocado and fillet it. And then go ahead and create a slice about 1/4 inch, turn it, and then go ahead and dice. All right, there's a diced avocado there. If you were fanning, then all you would do is you would cut even thinner slices. So if I were using these here, then I would have these 3 slices and I would go ahead and just fan them over the top of your ceviche. And this one's just a little, it's like losing a little bit of that firmness. But if you have one avocado that's nice and creamy, but also has some of that firmness, it just looks so beautiful on top of the ceviche, sprinkled with the black sesame seeds, just to give that contrast of color. All right, so just going to work through that. One thing I also wanted to mention is for the ceviche, this holds pretty well in your fridge. If you were planning to make a ceviche today that you were going to eat tomorrow, say you're having a few friends over, family, in a situation not like COVID, but a normal situation where you're going to be prepping a lot of stuff and you want to have this already ready, you could, I forgot to slice fillet this across. You could prep this the day before. And what you would have to do is layer on ingredients. And I like to layer on based off of moisture. So you have the heart of palm that's in the bowl, and that's in this marinade. And I like to then layer on the avocado directly over that. So I'll show you what that looks like, right? So I have my heart of palm here, and I would layer on my avocado. I would even mix in or make sure the avocado gets like really mushed into the acid so that it has a nice bit of lemon juice in there, a little bit of that olive oil. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna make sure that your avocado doesn't get brown. So, just like guacamole that uses acidity to kind of create a barrier for that browning to happen, for the oxidation to happen for the avocado, same thing goes here. So I would use my spatula and just mix this up and make sure it's like all pressed into the liquid. And then what you would do from there is the next thing that's moist is the tomatoes. So then the tomatoes, which also have some acidity, would get layered on top of the avocado and heart of palm mixture. Then after that, you can go ahead and add your jalapeño, which has a little bit of moisture to it as well. Then followed by, especially if you're using Persian cucumber, you would follow that with the cucumber, which is not as moist. And then lastly, you would top it with your cilantro. And essentially what you're doing is almost like, think of like a 7-layer dip. You're adding like all the layers on top. And then you can use a piece of plastic wrap or a airtight container to then go ahead and pop this in your fridge and let it hang out overnight. I trust you that it's gonna be, or trust me that it's gonna be even better the next day. All right, so I'm adding all of my ingredients here, layering that on, and because I don't have that much counter space, I'm just kind of grabbing everything with my hand rather than getting it with my knife, which feels a little odd, but hey, I don't have too much space here. And the last thing I'm gonna add here is my cilantro. So I'm adding a whole bunch of cilantro. And I like using the stems, but use the stems up to the point where it doesn't feel like super extra firm. Like I would cut off maybe about an inch or two off the bottom if they feel like they're like these stems are just extra crunchy firm. And all you want to do is mince your cilantro. So you're going to, again, bear claw. And if you want to go a bit faster, you could cut your bunch in half and then stack it all together and compact it as much as possible. And then what you're going to do is you're going to cut against your knuckles. Make sure your thumb is tucked in as well. And you're just going to mince up the cilantro into small pieces here, making sure that you're kind of going through in like one swoop. Because one thing I also see from folks is if you don't have a sharp knife and you're pushing really hard on your cilantro, what you're doing instead of slicing it is you're bruising it. And when you bruise it, it has these like, it literally turns black. And so you want to try to avoid that with a sharp knife and making sure that you're almost kind of using this rocking motion to make sure that you're slicing through the cilantro and not just pushing it down into the cutting board. The last thing that I'll do here is I'll just use my knife to break down all these pieces. I'm moving my cutting board around here to just mince this up to small pieces of cilantro. All right, almost there. And again, sharp knife is everything for cutting all of these veggies up. And you'll see that it's such a simple recipe. It's so easy to put together. This is perfect for summer right now that it's so hot. You don't want to turn on your stove or your oven to cook anything. All right, so I'm gonna grab my cilantro. Let me move this over. I'm gonna put my bowl here and just use my hands to layer on the cilantro. All right, and then I'll bring my bowl over and I'll start mixing everything together. We're just about there, everyone. All we'll need to do once we mix everything together is just taste to see if it needs any other seasoning, salt, pepper. Same thing here. If you were cooking with your artichoke, your asparagus, your white asparagus, any of it, you would do all the same things. So it's a really versatile recipe, really easy recipe. I'm gonna bring this to my cutting board. Let me give my hands a rinse. And I'm just gonna use a spatula here, which I love to use just because it's, I can gently fold everything together. And so you want a nice big bowl here. And this will serve about 4 people, like I mentioned. But if you're using this as like a starter for another meal, then it would serve a few more people if everyone's just gonna eat like one tostada or one small one. But if this is like your main meal with a michelada or something like that, it's also pretty filling. This could easily serve about 4 people. Everybody eating like about 2 tostadas a person, maybe 3. It really depends on how much of a tragon, tragona you are, how much you eat. All right, so keep mixing and mixing and mixing until you really see everything well incorporated. Sometimes I'll mix here and I'll find a little section of heart of palm that hasn't really been incorporated into the other ingredients. You wanna make sure that everything is fully mixed in. And if you let this sit for a little bit, those ingredients will really start to meld together. You'll really start to, you know, as you eat a piece of heart of palm, you'll, even if it doesn't have cilantro on it, you'll get that essence of all the flavors, the cilantro, the tomato, everything else in here. All right, so it's just about there. And notice that I'm folding pretty gently because again, this heart of palm is pretty fragile. So I don't want to break it, essentially. Break it and make it look, get it out of the ring shape that I so carefully cut it and made sure that it was a certain look and feel that I wanted. So I have to be really careful here. And I'll give it a taste. That is really delicious. It could use a touch more salt, but I'll leave that to each individual person. One thing I also like to do when I'm serving this is I'll leave some sea salt on the table, especially if I'm serving it family style. And if people want to add a little bit of, I actually have some really good sea salt right now from Colima. See if I can find it. And so it's this really delicious flaky salt. I got this from, it's from Cuyutlán, from Chicano Eats. And it's just like really flaky salt. So you have these like chunks of salt on there, just sprinkled over the top, and it's just so delicious. All right, so let me then pile this on a tostada that I have here. You can eat it with chips, especially if it's a little starter for folks. You can add it to a little bowl with a side of chips. Sometimes I also, with Todo Verde, we add a little bit of spring mix or leafy greens to the side, and then pile on the ceviche and some of that, the marinade, that olive oil and lemon juice, and that coats the leafy greens, and then serve it with some tortilla chips. So I am going to just grab a spoonful here and add it to the top of my tostada. And grab a little bit more.
Gabriela wants to know, when do the black sesame seeds get incorporated? And do any of the marinated juices get drained? Hers is overflowing a bit.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I typically don't drain it. The only time we drain it, mine is not overflowing, as you can see. Mine probably, like, this is my bowl here, and mine starts like about, I don't know, there's only about maybe an inch of liquid at the bottom, which is perfectly fine. The only time that I've drained it with Todo Verde is if we are doing a really large scale event and we're serving it on tostaditas, and I don't want the tostada to get too moist because I want it to crunch and hold a little bit. And so we drain the liquid out in that particular situation. But for this, I mean, I love the liquid in here. Like, I would even like drizzle a little bit of the liquid over the tostada. But like I said, you could also serve it with some leafy greens or something like that. And that will also give it a little bit of flavor so that it becomes even a more robust ceviche dish. And I actually couldn't find my black sesame seeds here, but you would sprinkle them over the top. So you could sprinkle them, if you're serving it family style, over the top of the bigger platter that you're using. Or if you're serving them in bowls or tostadas, you could just sprinkle it over the top. And I'm gonna use poppy seeds here for lack of having the black sesame seeds. And all that does is it provides a little bit of contrast of color, a little bit of texture. You could also get a couple of leaves of cilantro and just gently place that over the top. And it just looks so beautiful. And the flavor is really good. I'd love to know what you all think of it, especially if you're cooking right now. I'm gonna take a bite of this. And I'd love to know if you have any other questions. So I have my tostada, I have my michelada. I'm all set.